Hi there, my excellent biology student. Welcome back. Welcome back to part 2. We're still looking at transport in animals. This is Mr. Philip Kauma, the excellent biology tutor. Let us begin. Alright, so I'm taking my time with this topic because I realized that most of my students were finding it hard to understand some things. So the objectives for this tutorial video are, we're going to look at contraction and relaxation of the cardiac muscle, which is very crucial. Contraction as well as relaxation of the cardiac muscle. And then we're going to look at double circulation. By this, we are referring to pulmonary circulation as well as systemic circulation. All right, let us begin. So contraction and relaxation of the cardiac muscle. So we know that the heart is made up of a muscle, and this muscle is the cardiac muscle. That's the name of it. And this muscle is special because it's myogenic. It does not get fatigued. We looked at those points in the previous tutorial video. Now, the cardiac muscle being a muscle, it does two things, which is to contract as well as to relax. Well, any other muscle does the same thing. They all contract and relax. And in the process of doing that, movement is produced. So even the cardiac muscle contracts as well as relax. Now, contraction of cardiac muscle is called systole, while relaxation of cardiac muscle is called diastole. So when the cardiac muscle contracts, that is called systole. And when it relaxes, that is called diastole or diastole, depending on the number of teeth that you have. Otherwise, contraction of the cardiac muscle is known as systole, while relaxation of the cardiac muscle is known as diastole. Okay? Now, the sequence of events that occur during a single heartbeat are called the cardiac cycle. So there are some events that occur during a single heartbeat, okay? And that cycle is known as the cardiac cycle, okay? Now, the events of the cardiac cycle are summarized as follows. So, atrial systole. We know that atrial systole is referring to the walls of the atria. So just because of atrio, it is now referring to the walls of the atria. Remember, yesterday we looked at the structure of the heart. Are you following, my student? We looked at the structure of the heart. And we said that the heart has got 4 chambers. The top chambers are known as the atria. The bottom chambers are known as the ventricles. Now, these chambers, what do they do? Chambers simply receive blood. Ndivyo machita machemba. Not chamber not ija. But the chamber yaminali mumtimo. Okay? Chambers, they receive blood. And these chambers have got walls. And these walls, they are made up of a muscle, which is the cardiac muscle. So these walls, they contract as well as relax. So the walls of the atria are known as atrial walls. They are what? Atrial walls. And when these walls contract, that is referred to as atrial systole. So atrial systole is simply the contraction of the walls of the atria. Mwigwira, my students. Mwigwira. So when the walls of the atria contract, that is known as atrial systole. The contraction of the atrial walls. Sweet. I hope you're following me. I hope you're following me, my excellent biology student, because paliko kankani hapa. So when the walls of the atria contract, it is known as what? Atrial systole. Contraction of the walls of the atria. And then after the contraction of the walls of the atria, there is a pause. Okay, there is a pause. Okay, palikachani ka pause. Okay, and then after that, we're going to have ventricular systole. Ventricular systole. So ventricular systole, it is now referred to the walls of, it's now referring to the walls of the ventricles. So ventricular systole is simply the contraction of the walls of the ventricles. Ventricular systole is now the contraction of the walls of the ventricles. Apa manje, it is the ventricles, the walls of the ventricles, that are contracting. So when they contract, that is referred to as ventricular systole. Sweet. And then diastole. Diastole is a term for relaxing, okay? Diastole is a term for relaxing. So diastole is the relaxation of the walls of the entire heart. When the walls of the atria relax, that's atriodiastole or atriodiastole or atriodiastole. Diastole, the way you can pronounce it, it all depends on the number of teeth that you have. But just ensure that you know the spelling. It doesn't really matter your pronunciation. Just make sure that you know the spelling. Otherwise, when the walls of the atria relax, that's atriodiastole. When the walls of the ventricles relax, that's ventricular diastole. Are you following, my students? I hope you are following. So these are the events that will occur. There is atriosystole, then there's a pause, then there's ventricular systole, then there's diastole. Now let's look at the events in details. So event, atriosystole. So we know that during this stage or this event, which is atriosystole, the walls of the atria are going to do what? They are going to contract. So we're going to see that the walls of the atria will contract during atriosystole, okay? Because atriosystole is simply the contraction of the walls of the atria. So the atria will do what? Will contract. Now, when the atria is contracting, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? That simply means it is now pushing blood out of the atria going into the ventricles. Okay, so when the walls of the atria are contracting, they are contracting to push the blood so that it can go into the ventricles. So meaning the ventricles are doing what? They are receiving blood. So during the event, which is known as atriosystole, the walls of the atria are contracting, pushing the blood going into the ventricles. And as the ventricles are receiving blood, the walls of the ventricles are going to do what? They are going to relax. The walls of the ventricles are going to relax because they are receiving blood, which is coming from the atria. So the walls of the ventricles are going to relax as the ventricles are receiving blood from the atria. Play that again until you understand. Okay. Now, we have valves, right? The bicuspid valves as well as the tricuspid valves. So as the walls of the atria are contracting, they are pumping blood going into the ventricles, meaning the valves should be open to allow the blood to enter the ventricles. So the bicuspid valves as well as the tricuspid valves are going to open to simply allow blood to flow going into the ventricles. Okay, so the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are going to open while the semilunar valves are going to close. So the semilunar valves are the ones that are at the exit of the heart. As blood is coming out of the heart, there are valves there known as the semilunar valves. Okay, and blood, the flow of blood is from the atria to the ventricles. So the semilunar valves are going to close. Then the flow of blood in this event is moving from the atria going into the what? The ventricles. Okay, so that's what happens during atriosystole. So remember, during this event, the walls of the atria are contracting and they are pumping blood going into the ventricles. So since the ventricles are receiving blood, their walls are going to relax. And the tricuspid valves as well as the bicuspid valves are going to open to simply allow blood to flow from the atria going into the ventricles. And the semilunar valves are going to do what? They are going to close. And the flow of blood it will move from the atria going into the ventricles. Now, there's another event here known as ventricular systole. Ventricular systole. So during this systole, it is the walls of the ventricles that are contracting now. Ventricular systole, as we have defined it, is the contraction of the walls of the ventricles. So during this event, it is the walls of the ventricles that are contracting. So now that the ventricles have received blood after atriosystole, what will happen is that the atria will be empty because the blood has now gone to the ventricles. Meaning the atria will be what? Will now be empty. And since the atria are empty, they will now start receiving blood. The atria will start doing what? Receiving blood. As the atria are receiving blood, what will happen to their walls? They are going to relax. The walls of the atria are going to relax. And by the way, I hope you have a diagram which you can be looking at as you are listening to this, okay? So that you can see what I'm talking about. So just look at the diagram, okay? So what we're saying here is that from the atriosystole, we said that the walls of the atria are going to contract, pumping the blood going into the ventricles, isn't it? So meaning the ventricles are receiving blood and their walls are relaxing because they're receiving blood. Now that they've received blood, they will now pump it out of the heart. The ventricles will now pump it out of the heart. Now, during this event, which is known as ventricular systole, the atria are empty. So since they are empty, meaning they have to receive blood coming from the all parts of the body and from the lungs. So the atria will now start receiving blood. As the atria are receiving blood, their walls are going to do what? They are going to relax. That is why we're saying that the atria here relax. While the ventricles are going to do what? Contract, because the ventricles are now pumping blood. So since the atria are receiving blood, the bicuspid as well as the tricuspid valves should close so that that blood won't come out of the atria. So they will close. While the semilunar, so the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are going to close. While the semilunar valves are going to open. Because as the ventricles are pumping blood, that blood needs to come out of the heart. Therefore, the semilunar valves will need to do what? To open. And the flow of blood is, it will flow from the ventricles going to the arteries. You remember the two arteries? Pulmonary artery and the aorta. So that's what happens during the ventricular systole. So during the ventricular systole, it is the walls of the ventricles that are contracting. And as the walls of the ventricles are contracting, the walls of the atria are relaxing. So I think you should take it like that. So during atriosystole, it is the walls of the atria which are contracting. So automatically, if the walls of the atria are contracting, it should just click to your mind that the walls of the ventricles are relaxing. Okay, so when the walls of the atria are contracting, the walls of the ventricles are relaxing. And this is what happens during that's what happens during atriosystole. And then if the bicuspid valves and the tricuspid valves are open, that simply means the semilunar valves are closed. And then when the walls of the ventricles are contracting, that simply means the walls of the atria are doing what? Relaxing. And when the bicuspid valves and tricuspid valves close, the semilunar valves are going to do what? Open. And then diastole, it's just the relaxation, okay? The walls of the atria are going to relax, the walls of the ventricles are going to relax, and then the bicuspid valves will open, the semilunar valves are going to open, blood will flow from the veins into the atria. Okay. All right, my excellent students, that's what you need to know about these events. Make sure that you pay attention to them. Okay. Now let's look at double circulation. So this is a type of circulation where blood passes through the heart twice during one circulation around the body. So blood will just pass through the heart how many times? 2 times during one circulation around the body. It involves 2 types of circulation, namely the pulmonary circulation as well as the systemic circulation. So these are the types of circulations that are involved during double circulation. Let's look at each one of them. All right, so now let's look at the pulmonary circulation. Okay, let's look at the pulmonary circulation. Okay, first let's define it. So this is the flow of blood from the right ventricle to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, and from the lungs to the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. Let me explain, because I know some of you are already confused. This is simple, my excellent students. Let me use diagrams to explain. So let's say this is the heart right here, and then we've got, sorry about that, let me draw that again. So this is the heart, then let me change the color, then we've got lungs. Okay, so what we're saying is that blood is going to flow from the right ventricle of the heart going to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. And if you remember, if you watched the video for yesterday, I said that the pulmonary artery transports deoxygenated blood from the heart, taking it to the lungs. So during pulmonary circulation, blood is going to flow from the heart going to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. And this blood which is flowing, it is deoxygenated. I repeat, this blood is deoxygenated, meaning it does not contain oxygen. So blood is going to flow from the heart going to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. And blood is going to flow from the lungs going back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. So if you check, we've got the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. That is why it's called pulmonary circulation, because pulmonary response. So the pulmonary vein, it is the one that transports oxygenated blood now from the lungs, taking it back to the heart. So the pulmonary artery would transport deoxygenated blood from the heart, taking it to the lungs. Once blood passes through the lungs, it will be oxygenated. And as it is going back to the heart through the pulmonary vein, it is now oxygenated. So this is pulmonary circulation. Not drawing up. So it will flow. Let me even demarcate. The heart has got two sides. This side is the left, this side is the right. So blood is flowing from the right side of the heart through the pulmonary artery going to the lungs. And then it is coming back to the heart on the left side through the pulmonary vein. That's what pulmonary circulation is, my students. Nothing complicated here. So just know that the pulmonary artery is taking blood to the lungs, which is deoxygenated. And the pulmonary vein, it is taking that blood now back to the heart, but now it is oxygenated because it has passed through the lungs. So this is pulmonary circulation. Systemic circulation, which is also part of double circulation. Let's define it. This is the flow of blood from the left ventricle to the rest of the body through the aorta, and from the rest of the body to the right atrium through the vena cava. That's systemic circulation. Again, let me use diagrams to explain. So we have our heart here. Heart. And then we've got body here. So this is the body. Okay? So we've got our heart there and we've got the body. What they are saying here is that blood now, which is oxygenated, it is going to flow from the left ventricle to the rest of the body through the aorta. So the aorta will transport oxygenated blood from the heart, taking it to all parts of the body. Once that blood travels going to all parts of the body, the oxygen is going to be distributed. The oxygen is going to be what? Distributed to the tissue cells. So as blood is now coming back to the heart, it no longer contains oxygen. It is deoxygenated. So as blood is flowing back to the heart, it is deoxygenated. And the blood vessel which is now transporting the deoxygenated blood back to the heart is the vena cava. Again, I will demarcate my heart. So blood is coming from the left side of the heart, going to all parts of the body through the aorta. And from all parts of the body, it will go back to the heart on the right side through the vena cava. And this blood is deoxygenated. That's systemic circulation. Okay. So the purpose of pulmonary circulation is simply to oxygenate blood. If you check, blood which is deoxygenated went to the lungs, right? Through the pulmonary artery. It went to the lungs to go and do what? To collect oxygen, to be oxygenated. And then from the lungs, it came back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. And this blood which now came back to the heart is oxygenated. The purpose of systemic circulation is to simply distribute the oxygen. So as oxygenated blood has been collected from the lungs, it now has to be distributed to all parts of the body. And the blood vessel that is responsible for distributing that oxygenated blood is the aorta. All right, my excellent biology students, we're going to end here for this tutorial video. Watch out for part 3. Otherwise, this topic, I have a lot of videos that I will make so that you can understand everything concerning this topic. All right, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this video. Stay blessed.